Hi everybody, welcome to the Live Sound Podcast. Thanks for tuning in. This week we have with us George Chapman, a long-time front of house engineer for Marilyn Manson and monitor engineer for Steely. Obviously two very different gigs, very different jobs. It's great to talk to him about that. He's an extremely humble guy who has an amazing outlook on work, and I think it's a really great interview. So without further ado, I'll hand you over to George. Cool. So hi everybody, welcome to the Live Sound Podcast, and today I have with me George Chapman, who we've known each other a few years, long-time front of house engineer for Marilyn Manson and a few other things, so I'll let him explain. But how are you doing today, my friend? All right?
Oh yeah, I'm doing pretty good under the circumstances.
Well, of course. So we'll jump straight in. If you want to just tell us a bit about yourself, who you've worked with, who you are working with, and you know how you got started in this.
Okay, right on. Well, yeah, like you said, George Chapman, and I'm the front of house. I've been mixing for, I guess, close to 15 years for Marilyn Manson, and I do front of house for him, and I also do monitors on Steely. I've worked with systems tech on Dolly Parton, on Robert Plant. Gosh, I did Snoop Dogg, Ice Cube, a lot of other bands through the years. I just recently, last year, did the European Festival run with Deadland Ritual, mixed front of house for them, which is Geezer Butler, Steve Stevens, Matt Sorum, and Frankie Perez, like a little super group. And had a whole lot of things on the schedule for this year. But that's not happening. But what I am currently working on, which has been the saving grace, Donald Fagen introduced me to a singer songwriter who originally it was a full band, Peter Moore, and we set up out here to do some rehearsals to prepare him for his new tour. And they liked the way the room sounded here at my cabin and what they were getting. So when the quarantine started, he said, "Hey, let's do my new record out there, and I'll just quarantine at your cabin." And so it's really been helpful to have that source of income, and also be able to continue to be creative with the band and learn more about the recording side of things and dig into that a little deeper.
Amazing. Yeah, no, definitely falling on your feet there. I think a lot of people would be jealous of that situation. But so do you want to tell us, how did you get into everything then? Was it something that you actively wanted to do, or was it just something you fell into? And
well, originally when I was 14 years old, I worked for a DJ business called Battlestar Mobile Music Machine, and when I was 15, the guy who owned the business said that he wanted to sell it off because he had a day job that was transferring him to Milwaukee from Northwest Oklahoma. And so my grandmother co-signed for the loan. I bought half of the DJ business. And a couple of years later, I was working as a mechanic when I graduated from high school. At the age of 18, and I got a job on the railroad, which moved me to Wichita, Kansas, and I ran the DJ business on the weekend. And sort of the whole band thing started from a bowling alley that I was DJing at. Said, "We want to have bands in one of these weekends. Could we run them through your speakers?" And I said, "Sure, no problem." And the band showed up and said, "Okay, we'll hook into the speakers." And they said, "Well, here's the board, just mix us for the show." I said, "Well, whoa, wait a minute. I'm just supposed to hook you into the speakers. I don't know anything about mixing the music." And they said, "Oh, it's real simple. Just, listen, just balance the sound." And so that's sort of what got me started. I was really interested in how it all came together. And of course, at that time, mixing a band for me wasn't paying as much as DJing. So I was still DJing, but I was real interested. So I got some books from the library, started reading about mixing sound, and it turned into a thing, and I sort of became the local sound engineer. A lot of bands had me coming out and mixing, and so that's sort of how I got my start, from DJ to sound engineer.
Amazing. So when did it take the shift then from DJ to sound engineer, and like how did you get into touring then, and kind of find your first proper gig that you thought, right, this is could be something that I do?
Well, the interesting thing was my day job that I had, which was for Santa Fe Railway at the time. I was a locomotive and freight car mechanic. And at the time, they moved me to second shift. And I was bummed because, well, I've got to be at the gig setting up at 4 o'clock so we can get a sound check. So it pretty much put a hamper on all of my band shows. I was like, well, now I can't do music. So I worked about a year on second shift. I was completely bummed. I stopped doing anything musical. The next year I got a job on third shift, and I got the band stuff going because I was off on the weekends, and I was able to go ahead and do some weekend gigs. That sort of lit the fire again. And I decided I wanted to be a train dispatcher because I was like, well, I'm not making enough money to justify me not doing music. So I might as well get a great job with the railroad where I'm making a really good amount of money. So I went to dispatching school in Fort Worth, and I happened to come home on one of the weekends to do, there was this Chinese cover band that I worked for. They had 3 girl singers, and they would do a set with one girl, and then the next girl would come up, and the next, and they were real popular in the casinos because they had these beautiful ladies that were amazing vocalists, and they would change positions. So I was going to do a gig with them. I pulled off at a rest stop to get some gas, and this tour bus pulled in, and it said, "The United States Air Force tops in blue." And I thought, what is this? And I talked to a guy at the gas pumps, and he said, "Oh, I see you got lights in the back of your truck. Are you in the music business or something?" I said, "Well, yeah, I'm doing a weekend gig. I actually have a regular job, but on the weekends I'm doing." He goes, "Well, we've just fired our technical director, and we're looking for somebody to fill the position. Would you?" We kind of hit it off talking, and he could tell, I guess, maybe the way I was talking about having to go back to work. He thought, "Why don't you interview for the job?" So I had 2 weeks of vacation left at the railroad for that year. And I took 2 weeks, and I went down to San Antonio, interviewed for the job, and mixed a talent contest that they had. And they liked me, and they offered me the same amount of money that I was going to make as a train dispatcher. And I had worked 10 years to the day when I resigned from the railroad. And I took the job for the Air Force, and I worked 3 years for the Air Force, going to Afghanistan, Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan, Bosnia, Kosovo, all through the Middle East, doing shows and working with their entertainment group. And that's actually how I met Thunder Audio and Paul Owen. I was a purchasing agent for the government to buy all the speakers and mixers. And Paul Owen always said to me, "Hey, mate, if you're ever done working there, you get tired of it, we could put you to work here at Thunder Audio." And so, a few years later, I was thinking, I'd like to really go more, mainstream. What I was doing was great, but I'd like to go more mainstream to where now I'm not just focused on sound and lights and staging and flights and palletizing equipment and going into, crazy areas to do shows. More just, I'm a sound engineer and I'm working for a company. So I went to work for Thunder Audio. My first tour was the Gigant tour with Megadeth. And I think Lamb of God was on it that year. And I was mixing the B stage. I was a front of house engineer for the B stage. So that was my first tour into professional. Amazing. But that's sort of the story in a nutshell.
Yeah. No, I think that's definitely the most interesting way in that we've heard. How did the Manson thing come across then?
Well, just so happens, Thunder. One of the reasons I wanted to work for Thunder and develop a relationship was because they were providing audio for a lot of the bands I liked. They had Metallica, and they had Robert Plant. They had Marilyn Manson. They were providing stuff like for that Gigant tour. They were just doing a lot of the really good bands, and they were a local shop, and I really liked them, and they treated me nice. So Marilyn Manson, funny thing is, Marilyn Manson was my second or third tour that I did with them.
Wow.
And while I was on the tour, the lighting guy and the front of house guy at the time, there was a confrontation and some issues. And the guy ended up leaving, who was a great friend of yours and I, Dave, Shirt Nichols. He was the front of house guy, I was his systems tech. Mm-hmm. And they said, hey, George, would you mix the show tonight? Because I was already mixing the opener. Would you mix the show tonight while we get this other sound engineer from LA flown out? And I said, well, I tell you what, I'll mix the show tonight, but if you'll give me a chance to be the sound guy and not just fly someone else out. And so, they gave me a shot. And that night, the manager set up front of house and he told me, oh, wow, I love what you're doing. It sounds great. You can have the gig. And so that's sort of how that all started.
Amazing.
I'd already been on tour with him as a tech for, I think at that point, it was like almost 6 months. And then I was the guy that ran the microphone to Manson for a while. During the show, I'd be on stage and I'd run the next mic out, And so he kind of knew me already.
Yeah.
And
do you feel that obviously gave you a good advantage being there from the tech position? Were you obviously taking what Shirt was doing and carrying on from there?
Yeah. In fact, when he left, because the band had sound checked that day, there was already a sound check. And then all this happened and he just left, So it wasn't like I could just start over, And he was gracious enough and such a great person that he was like, you know what? I'm not going to cost the show any more problems. Leave my show on the desk and, I'm just going to go out. And I took over that show file. And, because he was such a big inspiration to me, and I love the man so dearly, and he was such a great engineer. The only thing I had an advantage of, I knew the music a little more because I was sort of a fan of like some of the Manson songs, But I took his core show file, and over a course of weeks or whatever, I developed it into what I wanted, and then. I think it was we only had left on that tour. There was only like maybe another month left of that tour. So it wasn't until the next record cycle that I could really put in position what I wanted. But the core show file that I have from Marilyn Manson is still a derivative from what Shirt had. And I've kept that intact because now it means so much to me even more that he's gone, that I know that he's there as part of the show with me.
Which is amazing. I mean, certainly in my humble opinion, he is the best that there was, and I don't think there will be any better. He was a wonderful engineer, as I say, and a great person as well. Very sadly missed, but so obviously you've been doing the Manson thing for a long time, and then you're also balancing it with journeys to the other end of the multi-core, and you're also still looking after systems, and so you kind of, from an audio perspective, you're still kind of moving around everywhere really. Do you find that keeps you ahead of the game? Do you find that every position helps the other, rather than just kind of, I'm a front of house engineer, I'm sticking here, this is what I'm doing? A lot of people's, whether it's sometimes ego will allow them to go at the other end of the multi, or whether they just don't enjoy it, or whether I've been doing a front of house gig. We've known guys who will pick up a monitor gig and then that's it. They become pigeonholed and they just get monitor gigs from then on in. And it's quite interesting that you're moving around and constantly changing position.
Yeah, it's funny because I'm down to be a systems tech, or I'm down to mix front of house, I'm down to mix monitors, I'm down to do anything. And when I started in the business, it was like, at that time when I was doing bands, I was running the lights, I was doing the monitors, I was mixing front of house, and I was carrying all the backline and setting up the backline for the band I was working with. So I was the everything guy. And I found that, like, it's really good to know a little bit about everything. But then my expertise, of course, or the place that I kind of went to, was audio. And until you get to the larger end of touring, audio is everything. It's a lot of times it's mixing monitors and front of house from the same board. And even for Peter Moore, when I go out, the singer-songwriter I'm recording here, I've got their inner file on several different desks so that I do everything. I still mix their in-ears and I mix front of house. And I tell them, hey, I'm mixing the monitors. So, let's make sure in the sound check that you've got everything the way you want, because the last thing I want to hear is somebody say, hey, turn this up over the house mic. Yeah. So we get it dialed in. But I think it's really good to be a utility guy. And I think it's good to be able to work at every angle. And if I am a tech on a big tour, I prefer to be the stage tech and patching and taking care of the monitors and all that, because it gets me more involved with everything. And then in my mind, I know where every connection is made, and I know right to go to troubleshoot something. And it's the same with the Manson. Even though I mix in front of house, I plug in every single microphone.
I was going to say, is it hard to, if you're walking out to front of house, is it hard to let go without knowing that everything's right on stage when that's, that's as much of your domain as front of houses?
Well, yeah. And, I was real lucky to be a tech with Bruce Dans, who was another, the great monitor engineer that, was working with Shirt on Slipknot for years. And then, of course, on Avenged Sevenfold. And then on Manson, he was at the other end. So with Bruce there, he's always going back over everything and double checking it. And so things were great. But when I get away now, I found that when he's not there and I'm working on another gig, I just want to be the guy that plugs everything in. And then I know if this goes down, I'm not left to question, well, I don't know where that route to get there. I can sort of go and suss it out.
And I suppose being that prepared on a gig like Manson is, which, is obviously well known as being a high pressure situation, and anything can happen at any one moment. So I suppose making sure that you've got everything, and for your own peace of mind, making sure that everything's in the right order and in the right place is got to be paramount in a show like that.
Yeah. Well, and fortunately, another reason I do it is because for years, Manson's hired my audio company, and I provide the consoles, all the cables, mic stands. So it is my control package. So it's another part of my service is, to make sure that I'm on top of it. And then our tech that we carry, he's just there to sort of get the monitors hooked up and take care of our monitor engineer, Stu Wilson, who's out with us at this point. To make sure everything goes good on the stage. And then, of course I show him, hey, this is how all my stuff runs. So if there's a problem, I can't run from front of the house, of course. So he's there to sort of oversee it. But I try to take that pressure off of him. And thankfully, Manson uses my control system. So it's a lot of pressure on me because, it's my stuff out there. But at the same time, it's been able to let me be able to afford different things and to actually take my income level and my company to the next level by owning the equipment on the tour and making sure that it's in tip-top shape.
It definitely seems to be a thing that, more and more people are doing. I mean, obviously, potentially not to the level of S6Ls and things like that, but, obviously with digital technology becoming cheaper and more accessible, and it's quite common now where you're one guy and you're going out and you've got your console that you own, and you're doing front of house, you're doing monitors, you're doing the virtual sound check every night, so you're recording every night, and then you're being asked to mix stuff on the road, and so it's I just think that's a really interesting thing, and and a lot more people are doing it.
It's essential if you want to really have a good successful career out of music in general to be able to do a little bit of everything. And it's really nice to have been able to be in a position to be able to build up my company and to offer these products to the client. But then it gives me a sense of, assurance. It's like we go to Japan or we go anywhere overseas, I'm taking my same mics. They're always the same mics with those same looms. They're always the same looms. So I know when I get over there and I plug all this in, all of my inputs, my gains, it's all going to come back just the same because it is the same, and you would think, oh, well, we're going to get these different stage volumes the same, but it's like, even when you're getting different mics and stuff, sometimes the gains and things are different through different cables and different mics, and it's really nice to be able to have that consistency, for sure.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
I appreciate the bands trusting in me enough that they want to help me and my company be successful. And so I want to make sure that my equipment is at the absolute tip top shape, is good or better than any of the competing companies. And we're always going to use them because I don't own speakers or amps.
Yeah.
I got out of that business years ago. I sold all that stuff. It's so hard to keep that stuff, and leave that up to the big guys.
I mean, I personally think that's the future anyway. As it goes, you do see every day more and more engineers now. Well, actually, I can afford what I want to use, and it's not a case of now where in the days of XL4s or whatever, and well, I can afford this little 8-channel Soundcraft or whatever. Now, for a few grand, you can afford a 48-channel, a 64-channel, a 96-channel digital console that actually, and with things like waves and all of that kind of
Yeah.
stuff, you can actually have everything and stand at front of house, having not spent a huge amount of money, thinking, well, do you know what? I've got all the tools I need. And I think more and more engineers are going to do that over time. And I think it's interesting whether in years to come, whether it will be racks and stacks and then the band tour with all the production, So I think it's definitely a good position to be in. Just moving away from gear for a minute, we will come back because I want to ask you about some gear choice and stuff like that. I just wanted to touch briefly on the other side of of you, which is the monitor gig for Steely Dan, which is obviously the sound engineer's classic band.
Yeah.
And really 2 gigs that couldn't be any more different. Front of house for Marilyn Manson, and then at the other end of the multi monitors for Steely Dan. Like how does your approach technically differs, but do you find it's an easy thing to just switch between the two?
Yeah, for me, I think for me it is. It doesn't. I think one or the other is, it's easy for me, I guess, because I'm used to doing that. I was the monitor tech when I started on there, and my friend Peter Thompson, monitor engineer, and he also works with Squeeze, and I also work with Marilyn. So it's like us 2 guys can pass the gig off. If he's not on Squeeze and I'm on Marilyn, he takes over the monitor position. If he's on Squeeze and I'm off of Marilyn, I take it. Fortunately, last year I was able to do the whole tour, but it's been about the same time frame I've worked with Steely Dan as I've worked with Marilyn, and it just goes back to being that stage tech. I was the stage tech that patched everything, so I like being that stage tech rather than a PA tech, because I know every cable run and I know what people are getting. And so it was sort of, in my mind, it was easy because I already understood the layout of where everything was going and what people were getting. But the difference is it might be a little more challenging to be the monitor engineer, just because it's not about what I want anymore. It's not my trusted front of house mix that I get to do. It's now I'm providing a service for these band members to give them what they want. And sometimes maybe something would seem out of the norm for me, but for them, it's something they want to hear. And so that's one thing to break out of that front of house job, is like, so-and-so only wants to hear themselves and maybe a little bit of the hi-hat, or the other guy wants this, but then every show it changes. It's like when we get into a shed where the roof is real low and we've got a lot of other issues with stuff coming off the stage into their world a lot more. Maybe I'll take all of those drums out of a monitor because they've got plenty coming off the stage, whereas tomorrow night they want a whole drum mix. So it's just understanding what each individual person wants. And working with Donald, he is, got a great ear for sound and knows what he wants. And so to me, I just enjoy making sure that the band gets the absolute best of what they can get so that they can perform and make this great music. And it really gives me a sense of, I think being on stage almost gives me a little more sense of being part of the show,
Yeah.
you know, because I'm almost in the music with them at the time. And it's a different approach, but it definitely keeps me on my toes, and it makes me appreciate when I go back to front of house and it's more,
That was going to be the
I'm
next thing.
not worried about
Do you feel
32
that, you know, that was going to be my next question, whether you feel like it makes you a better front of house engineer, and then whether, again, vice versa, the front of house side makes you a better
I
monitor
think
engineer
it
because you
does.
have a much more open view of the whole gig. And again,
I
you
think
know,
it
obviously
does.
front of house, you've got to have not ego, but you've got to have confidence in what you do, and you have in your head, like you say, exactly how you want it to sound, and then it's your job to deliver that, and then to go to the other end of the multicom completely, then put that aside and leave the ego and leave the you know, your ideas at the door, and then take on 110% what the artist wants, regardless of whether you agree with it or not, regardless of whether you think it's, you know, right or not, or whether it sounds correct or not. You're there to, you know, again, not argue with them and not, oh well, it's, and to be able to take what is in their head and, again, then use your technical skills to essentially create that. Was obviously the communication side of it, and understanding your artist as well on a personal level even is obviously massively important as well.
Yeah, you know, I appreciate all the opportunities I've been given to work at both ends of the snake. And I tell you what, every time I go in there, I know I'm living my dreams, and I'm doing everything that I always wanted to do. And all I want to do is, above and beyond everything, I want to be a good guy, a likable person, and I want to provide a very professional service that is not about me. It's about taking care of the band. It's about taking care of the fans and all the people that paid the money, because they're probably working. A lot of them are working 9-to-5 jobs. They've saved up money to come to the show. You know, not, you know, I'd say a majority of the people in the audience are the you know, 9-to-5 workers.
Mm.
And you want to give these people the best show you can give them. And I think that as long as I keep that in mind, it's a little bit more pressure on myself, but that's the pressure that sort of helps me step up to the plate and perform. And going from monitors to front of house, if I've worked, let's say I've worked months and months as a monitor guy, now I've got to go out and, you know, a couple weeks later do front of house. It is a bit of a mind switch to go, okay, now I'm handling this huge PA with all these people. I've got to really pump it out. It's not about getting this to drive through the mix and that to drive through the mix to hear it in the monitors but not feedback. Now it's about getting fuller sounds and painting this picture of the way that the fans have heard the record on their CD players or their car stereos, and emulating that live. You really have to put on a different hat and make sure you're delivering that product to them.
Absolutely. No, I think that's an amazing outlook on it. I think it's often overlooked when we're sat complaining about catering not being good enough, or the bus drive was really bumpy or something. You forget that there's people on the front row of that gig, and that's going to be the best night of their life. It's going to be something that they're going back to work or school or college or whatever, talking about for years. You know what I mean? I think it's really important to not lose sight of that. And as I say, it's, you know, as you said, it's very easy to take for granted, and it's refreshing to hear that, you know, you're constantly making an effort to keep yourself grounded. I think that's an amazing thing. So, speaking about that, we'll move back to you know, we're talking about the dream job. So obviously we all do this because we like playing with toys. Obviously you've got a pretty big one sat behind you, so it's an obvious question as to your console of choice, but I'll ask it anyway, because obviously when we toured together, you were back on a D show, and I see you've made the upgrade to the S6 now. Do you want to tell us a bit about why that's your console of choice?
Well, my console of choice is the old Midas XL 200,
right,
with the drummer, comps and gates, and, you know, all the goodies with the Clark on the left and right, and of course the Eventides, which are still in the rack here, and the Avalons, which I see you've got a couple there.
Yeah.
You know,
oh, that's
and I actually own one, but haven't had it out in years and years. But yeah, for modern times and the bands and everything I'm doing now, the Avid is the console of choice. And I think it's, you know, in the beginning, it's what I was mixing on, and I got a good deal on buying one, and it let me keep consistency in the show. And what I really found about using those desks was, especially on festivals and stuff, where that and the PM5D were these desks that they designed to really be fast desks with the grid system for patching, and there wasn't a whole lot of it wasn't very complicated to get around on. It made really clear sense and easy sense. You could run in and, oh, here's a band that just showed up. Oh, we've added another band to the opening slot. 24 inputs. It was really easy to just throw them on something and make them sound good real quick into another show file. So I like the ease of it in the beginning. And now that they've moved into the new S6L, I think that they've really stepped up the game. It's 96K. It really has a high-end professional quality sound to it. With the AVB, it talks really nice to your playback or record setup. And now they've made the Waves card with the Waves external server and all of that work really seamlessly. I'm on the brand new update, the 6.3. I just got that done last week. And
so have you found it's changed? How's your mix differed or your approach differed? Because obviously there's a huge amount more in that console than there was in the profile. Have you adopted a lot more of that, or are you still kind of very much mixing as you mix on a profile, but taking advantage of the sound quality?
Yeah, it's similar, but the one thing I really like about this is you got the layouts, which before I would, I'd patch the board. It's like, oh, I wanted my kick, snare, hat, and bass and tracks on the front page. So you sort of went in and you built your show that way. Well, this board, you just build your show one-to-one as your input sheet is, and then you build the layouts to keep all the things on the pages that you want them to be. And are
you a snapshot guy? Are you changing that between songs, or is it a muscle memory thing that just sticks where it is?
I do change it between songs if we're going from different mics, like on Manson, if he's going from the regular mic to the headset mic, that switches to another layout that puts the headset in the position of where the main vocal is. So it's very minimum changes, so to speak. I'm fortunate enough with that band that like there's not anything more going on that I need to go beyond the amount of faders that are on the front page that are accessible. I do keep my toms and cymbals and some track stuff that's not being adjusted or different things in that manner on the back page, and they just stay there because I'm typically not. If I do need to make that change, I'll go to the VCA or the group and make an overall change with it. But individually, those things pretty much stay the same. Sonically, this board, it sounds, the other boards sound okay, but this board sounds really good. It's almost like when you're playing back your tracks on AVB or whatever, it's record quality. It sounds like a real mixing board, like you're getting a real high quality sound that you just couldn't get out of the profile. Don't get me wrong, it sounded pretty good for what it could do, but you quickly realized when you go to this board that it's so much better with, I guess the different preamps. It does 96K and you're hearing a lot more of everything. And then it's got some latency controls on it where you can, switch on delay compensations for inserts and plugins. It does not delay compensate external server, but it does delay compensate everything that you've done on the board and the inserts you've done.
Amazing. Well, as I said to you earlier, we'll bully you and see if we can get you to do a little video walking around that. But
okay,
2 more questions on gear. We'll go through nice and quickly. PA of choice and any specific configurations that you prefer.
I think
if
right
any.
now. Well, I think right now a lot of speaker manufacturers are making some great products. And you can always go, well, there's a lot of good cars out on the market. Well, yeah, for me, it's all about the artist. I'm not going to say one speaker system for every single band, But for Marilyn Manson, I'm always happy to see a D&B system. I like the GSL, the new one, sound really good. Of course, you get a great sound with the K1. And I've heard some good shows on the Cohesion, the new Claire stuff. But for me, I think some of the best tours I had were even like when JBL, when we debuted the VTX years ago, that I thought that rig, when it was done right, sounded extremely well. But I like the GSL. It gives me everything I want. It's really powerful. It's got all that low mid. It just sounds good all the time. There's not a whole lot of doing this or that or the other for each room. You sort of got a great sounding rig right out of the box, and you don't have to do a whole lot to maintain that. I'm typical to having the old fashioned left right hang with the out fills and the front fills and the subs on the floor in a left right configuration. But although with the right systems tech and a really smart guy out there working the PA, you can configure it, you know, a dozen different ways, and it sounds great in all those ways, as long as the guy's keeping in mind, this is the music you're mixing and this is the show we're delivering, and they set it up that way. I've found that, about any rig can sound right with the right guy behind the controls.
100%. That's great. And then obviously we've talked about Eventides and we've talked about Avalons, things like that. You're one kind of excluding the desk, you're one kind of desert island piece of gear that you really have to have with you for let's say for the Manson show.
Oh man. I mean, I guess it is the Eventide, the harmonizer, the H3500 or 3000 DSE. And that's only because it's not take away from the plug-in version, but the real rack unit has always had this sound to it. And when you have a lead vocalist, which is going to be your number one input that's out in front of the mix, and when you put that, whatever it is, whether it's the 910 or the micro pitch or the magic air or crystals on a guitar, or when you put that, typically the micro pitch on the lead vocalist and you blend it in, doesn't matter which kind of music you're mixing, country or rock or pop or whatever, and you blend it in nicely, it takes that vocal and it just lets it set out there and sound like a professional concert vocal. And to me, that unit does it better than anything else. And if you've got that vocal sounding that way and it's the front thing in the mix and you build the mix around it, you've got a really high-end concert professional sound, because the thing that's out in front has got a really nice, rich effect on it that, it can be overdone, but tastefully done, I think it really helps make it all sound better.
It's definitely the one thing that I found cannot be emulated. I'm the same as you. I'd started in Studio World, and I was lucky enough to sit behind an SSLG Plus for a lot of years, and we had an Eventide H3000 that was hardwired to aux 3, and it was the in joke in the studio. It was a H3000 on micro pitch shift, and the in joke was, if it doesn't sound good, just give it a bit of knob 3, and all of a sudden it just goes boom. And it's the one thing, I've tried the Eventide, the various different plugins. I've tried an Eclipse. I took an Eclipse out with me, all that kind of stuff, and it's obviously I'm an Alan Heath guy, and I'm a big fan of the ADT plugin in that console. Does about as close as I found, but definitely if push came to shove, H3000, I'm with you on that one. But no, that's really interesting to hear about gear, and as I say, we'll hopefully look at that in a bit more detail in another video. So my one last question, and then I'll let you go, is just is the big one that I've been asking for everyone. Just that one piece of advice that you think could be a technical thing or an attitude thing or anything that you think could really help people listening.
I've always said this, and especially when you're starting out, is don't tell anybody what you can do or what, of course you got to whenever you're trying to get a job or whatever. But when you get out there and you're working, just let your work speak for itself. I never said I could mix a band or I could do anything. I was the tech. I was the guy setting up the mic stands and But I knew when I got that chance to get on the board, I was going to show them what I was about, and I was going to be prepared. And I was let, because if you build yourself up and there's all this hype and you don't deliver what, but if nobody thinks you can do anything, and then you just become the guy that can, I'm there to grab the cable, I'm there to wind this up. Okay, you want me to mix a band? Well, here, have a listen to this. It's like, just let your work speak for itself, and try to be a nice guy, and get along with everyone. And yeah, I think that's the best advice I could probably give anyone, whether it's in music or anywhere.
And I think with that comes longevity as well. You let your work speak for yourself, and that's when people. It might take a little bit longer than if you were that guy who's everyone's favorite guy when he's hammered at 10 o'clock at night or whatever, after the show. But if you're that guy that just it's always been my thing as well, is just head down, get on with it, and listen to this. And if you like what you hear, then great. And the people that notice that are then the people that respect you for what you do. And I think with that comes longevity as well. So I think that's definitely some great advice. But cool. Well, thank you very much, my friend. I think that's
yeah, absolutely.
That's been great
nice
talking to you. Yeah, lovely catching up with you again, my friend. And
absolutely.
And stay safe.
You too.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks so much, George. Really great catching up with you after all this time. Really enjoyed speaking to you, my friend. And thanks so much. Hope you guys enjoyed it as well. Please like and subscribe. YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, all that usual stuff. Next week we have with us James Baker, actually another guy who flips between either end of the multi-core. And James is also very involved with the S6 at Avid. He works with Cheryl Cole, Nile Rodgers, all kinds of people. And another really great interview that I really enjoyed doing. So thanks again for tuning in, and we'll see you next week.